Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. Today, I'm here with Quincy Turner from the United States, who is an author, and we're going to talk about her debut novel called Blood Sacrifice. So, yeah, thank you so much for being here, Quincy, and for taking the time. Can you introduce yourself and your book and just tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'm Quincy Turner, and yeah, I'm from the New York area. Lived in New York City for years, but now we're just outside of New York. um, and yeah, so this is my first book. And otherwise, I do, marketing on the side, content marketing for sustainable companies. So yeah.
And how did you get into writing?
Um,
Marketing and writing seems like they're worlds apart. So how did you decide, like, I'm gonna write a novel?
I think it was always something that was on my mind ever since I was a little kid. I always wanted to be a writer, but marketing was more maybe practical. So I followed that path and just kind of always wrote on the side. I've written a couple other things, but this is my first like real kind of heavy duty novel. Yeah, and I did poetry for a while and just always trying to do something kind of creative on the side.
Yeah, I think it's an issue for a lot of creatives, myself included. Oh, sorry, my cat wants to sit with me. Let me just.
Oh.
Um, it's really rainy now in South Africa, so it's really cozy. So I've had cats on my lap all day.
That
um,
sounds nice. It's freezing here.
yeah. Yeah, the thing with creatives is we need to find other avenues to make money or make a living because like making a living as a writer or an artist is really difficult. Um,
Absolutely.
so, so how long did it take you to write this novel? And can you tell us like what it's about and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, yeah, okay, so, this is actually a prequel of another book that I started writing in, like, late 2019, and I was talking to my editor, and she said, "This feels like it could be really, like, 2 books," which makes sense, and the other one still isn't published. I really followed this one, completely, and it took me, obviously, a while. It was published in late 2023. So yeah, it's been out for a little bit, but with COVID and everything, I feel like it took longer. I was oddly moving a lot during COVID, which is, yeah, not what you would think. But it's a dystopian novel that is, it's kind of about a revolution, kind of, got some class warfare going on. But it's also really about like, you know, how technology reshapes or could reshape human connection. It's about, you have these androids that could replace human beings in a lot of ways. So, romantic relationships, stuff like that. And if you start viewing other human beings as objects as well, or just, you know, kind of they're interchangeable with the machines. What happens, is the world void of empathy. But, it's also kind of looking at, um, the kind of the worst that humans could be. I mean, once again, it's dystopian, but it's when I was living in New York, you know, I went on all sorts of dates. I was single then, and met one particularly like kind of nerdy, wealthy guy who had at the time back in the day had like a ton of Bitcoin, right? And he went to this like talk in Silicon Valley, and he came back and was telling me about it, and it sounded so awful. Like they were saying at this talk like, oh, all these wealthy people are going to buy land in New Zealand because, if like a class like warfare situation happens in the US, no one can get them there. And he says this as if it's like a serious thing and as if like I should somehow like be okay with what he's saying. And it really struck, like, I feel like, shortly after that, number one, never saw him again. Number two,
Yeah,
really
that's a
started
red
writing
flag.
about this. Just like, are you serious? I don't know. Anyway, strange that he'd say that to me too, because like what? Like, oh yeah, great idea. Anyway, I started writing about it because he people like him in New York City seem very like lonely and sad and no matter how much wealth you have, it doesn't really protect you from yourself. So some of that is in the novel as well.
Wow, that's deep stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so with you, did the pandemic have any influence on the whole dystopian idea? Because I know during the pandemic, well, that was kind of dystopian, the empty streets, and it felt very like Mad Max at some point.
Yeah.
So did that, because you said you wrote it during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so a another actually weird, date that I went on long before, uh, starting the first novel was with a professor who what are they called that study like all these diseases and was saying like it's just a matter of days before there's a global pandemic. So the first novel is really more pandemic-y, but then when the pandemic broke out, I was like, nobody wants to necessarily read about like the horrible stuff that they've just been through, even though this is kind of still might strike a chord with certain people. Uh, you know, just the wealth disparity and all that. But yeah, I think a lot of it, I was inspired by events that were going on at the time for sure. Um, yeah, politically, everything. It's just been a wild ride in the US. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I follow the news. Elon Musk is actually South African. He went to the university I went to, and now like his whole political involvement. I know we shouldn't really be talking politics, but yeah, it's very interesting that's happening in the US. I keep following the news and
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, not to go down that road. It's just kind of like where my novel is anyway, is like, in the novel there's uh the main, you could call him a dictator, is actually like a multi-billion dollar like tech dude that owns a lot of stuff. And in it, it's like, like if you're already a billionaire and you're a tech guy, why would you want so much ownership? It was kind of like something that I was struggling with. And then, the whole thing with Elon Musk, I'm like, well, I guess, they want more. So it's not so far-fetched after all. I don't know.
Yeah, your the dictator sounds very specific, actually.
Yeah, surprisingly, yeah, it wasn't meant to be anything close to that, so
It's interesting. Sometimes we write things and we have a way of anticipating certain events based on what we see happening around us. That's the feeling I get from what you're saying. Feels like this novel was inspired by a lot of external factors and a lot of experiences for you, which I think it's great. People can always relate to things we've experienced. So is that a methodology for you? Where do you find your like inspiration
Ye
for the characters and what you're writing?
yeah, I think that's definitely true. Just one quick note, I think it's interesting that, at least, in the US, a lot of people are quoting, Margaret Atwood right now, which is, unfortunate, surprising, that we're, being able to relate so much with sci-fi, but that's what sci-fi is able to do. It makes, fantastic plots, but really it's rooted in what's going on, I think politically or, in the scientific world, whatever. Yeah, so I I got my inspiration for this in a lot of different places, I think. I think it's interesting what, people are doing in the field of robotics and what they are trying to do with, androids. I think it's interesting that they are trying to make, female androids. There was one that was, premiered at, like, some tech conference, and within what was it? It was like an hour or so, it malfunctioned because the amount of men that were touching it, which is very, creepy. Yeah, I know. It's very so, I look at stuff like that that's happening, just stuff in the US and just living in New York, all of it inspired this, and people who have read the book are like, "Oh, it's so sad," and I'm like, "Yeah, but so is a lot of the stuff that's going on in the world," it's very American, it's very everywhere, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love sci-fi so much because you can comment on current events by referring to some hypothetical future. And people think sci-fi is like far-fetched and all out there, but actually it's so much related to what is happening currently. So, are there any other sci-fi influences that you had? Um, Literature, films?
Yeah, oh, yeah, oh, films. Oh, well, first, I'll go with, like, the classics. I obviously who doesn't love 1984? I think that's a fantastic book. Everything by Isaac Asimov, or Philip K. Dick, fantastic. I know I'm listing off the classics, but, also the, Parable of Sour by Octavia Butler, she's great.
Mhm.
And then I this also takes place in, like, 2 worlds. It's also, taking place in a virtual reality. So, I loved Snow Crash. I thought that was a great book too. Um, and then this isn't sci-fi, but, I really loved, American Psycho. I know a lot of people don't feel that way, but I thought it was an interesting take on, capitalism and, like, toxic masculinity. Very, very toxic. But then, yeah, films. I love there's so many great sci-fi films, and there's so many, like, great books that haven't been adapted yet that I'm just kinda like, "Oh, I wish they'd go ahead and do it." Snow Crash being, like,
Yeah.
a main one for me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but let me think. I mean, I don't have to continue listing, but, like, oh, there's so many good ones. I love Akira too, as far as
Oh, yeah.
both, you know, the graphic novel and the movie. Fantastic, so
And I'm hearing a lot of I don't want to say it, feminism, Marxism. Are you into that type of stuff? Class wars and anti-capitalism. Is there
yes.
some like social commentary? I get the feeling you're yeah, and the book itself, yeah, maybe Marxism and feminism, does it deal with those two things?
It does. I sort of wish okay, so when I split off the 2 novels, the first one was way more, looking at the, androids, the relationships, more feminism, and this one, slightly mutes that because I kind of, like, dove into this dystopian world, kind of it it was very loosely inspired by a couple people, so, especially the man in it who's very toxic. Um, but yeah, I'm really interested in both. I grew up in, like, a somewhat wealthy suburb of New York City, and I grew up with a lot of people that were, quite well off, and it's just, no matter how much money you make, it's not a lot of miserable people, unfortunately. A lot of happy people, but more that I can point to that have so much, like, dysfunctional stuff. This, um, form of capitalism in the United States doesn't help anybody. Um, the CEO of ChatGPT, what's his name? Sam Altman, is that his name?
Allman, yes, yes, yeah.
He was just recently saying, like, I think Elon Musk is a very unhappy individual, and I don't doubt it. It's just, yeah. So anyway, I am very into both those things.
Yeah, I think maybe that's an experience you can only have after, or a perspective you can only have after living in a city, in a wealthy suburb, and having experienced all of that. Is that why you kind of moved slightly away from New York now? Is the city? I've never been to New York, but I also live in the city, but I more in the suburbs, so it's not that. But I can imagine cities are miserable. Um, did yeah, did that influence uh your ideas to move away?
God,
Or
yeah. I mean, I wanna move farther. So, my husband is Icelandic, and I'm like, "Let's just go to Europe." Like, not that
oh,
there's
that's
it's
cool.
always the grass is greener, but the New York area is just kind of intense, honestly. But yeah,
Yeah,
I love being in nature much more, for sure.
okay. And do you is there any, because most dystopian things or dystopian novels, sci-fi, a big part of it is like we killed nature, we destroyed it with our machines. Is there any of that that you talk about in your novel?
Absolutely. It's definitely after, a big disaster that isn't mentioned in this, book, but another thing that has happened is, like, there was, all the quantum computers kind of glitch out just for a second, because of this it's a long story, but, so also in this, people lose, like, half of the information of, like, their history and their past because books aren't really a thing anymore, and, I think losing who you are is a big part of it. I mean, it's chaotic, it's awful for everyone, but yeah, there's also this fire that's, like, constantly it's mentioned that it keeps burning somewhere in the background, and some ash can fall into the city, and when I was living in Oregon, that would happen. So, there'd be these forest fires, and Oregon, Washington, or California, they just call it fire season now, which is upsetting, but ash would fall on your car just from some fire burning far away, and you could smell it, but, like, you can't see it, and I thought that was I mean, it's just part of our reality now, I guess, yeah.
And that's very dystopian.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. I've never had that experience, but I know when I fly in from Cape Town to Johannesburg, there's this cloud of smog
Mm.
above the city, and it always upsets me a lot. Because when you go to Cape Town, there's just
Oh,
mountains and
wait, you cut out.
seas, so there's a lot of it's very clean, and the air is really clean. Um, so that must be a really weird experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the orange haze that, it looks like outside is wild too. That happened in the New York area, but it happens all the time out west. It's, yeah,
Okay.
unsettling.
And And the title of the book, it seems very creepy.
It's very
Why
intense.
that title? Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good question. I couldn't think of a title that would really fit this, unfortunately, until after the fact. But it took me so long. And then, this whole revolution happens. It's really, a sacrifice for a better tomorrow, or is it, is going down that route really worth it? So that's where the title comes from.
Okay. And the blood part?
Lots of it towards the end,
Okay.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a
And
real, Shakespearean
mm,
tragedy towards not to give anything away, but all
oh,
sorts
okay.
of
Okay. I haven't read it, obviously, because I always tell people I'm not like good at, well, I don't like reading, so
Are you an
I would rather.
audiobook?
Yeah, I'd
person.
rather like talk to people about the book than read it myself and write a review of it.
Yeah.
Um, and oh yes, and so future plans. So next book, you're going to release the second part of this one, right?
Um, I might okay, I have a couple of short story ideas that are still within the same universe, and I think I'm gonna go that route first. I'm gonna just do
Okay.
it's gonna be a much shorter collection. This book is pretty
Mhm.
long. Um, so that's my next step. Um, yeah, as far as sci-fi writing goes, for sure.
Okay. I love short stories because they're really easy to digest.
I
It's not
agree.
this long thing. And so for future, are you thinking about like, so are you making like a universe type of thing of this? Is your aim to have like a, Lord of the Rings type thing, or are there other projects with other themes that you would also consider?
As far as sci-fi goes, I have so many ideas, honestly, for
Mm,
this. I spent so long really building it out, thinking about all these characters that aren't even in this book. So there's a lot of room to mess around there. Um, I'm just gonna see how it goes for now. I'm gonna write the next, like, short story collection and see how that goes, but I have other ideas actually that are, a step away from some sci-fi, so I might explore those as well. But no matter what, eventually I wanna come back and, continue the sci-fi. It's really, like, a passion project for
mm. I
me.
can see you're passionate about sci-fi. That's really it's really nice to see because I think we take sci-fi for granted. We don't realize just how much you can really do with it, which is
Yeah,
sad.
I think it has I okay, this is just, obviously my opinion, but I feel like sci-fi has the opposite problem as, like, romance. So I think, like,
Mhm.
romance books sell like crazy, and they're
Yeah,
always highly rated on Goodreads, everything. Sci-fi I see rates lowly because there's so many different niches inside of sci-fi, and it does super well with, like, TV shows and movies, whereas romance has the opposite problem. People think it's much
yeah,
cornier on screen, but people love sci-fi when it comes on screen, I feel like. But they won't necessarily pick up the book because it could be dense, like The Martian, right? Just kind of
yeah.
hard sci-fi is difficult, and then when you see it as a movie, you're like, "Oh my god, that's amazing."
You're absolutely right. I don't think I read sci-fi short stories. I like those, but I don't think I've ever read a full sci-fi. No, I've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but
Oh, that's a
that's a
fun
different.
one.
Yeah, but that's like a whole thing on its own. I feel like that should be its own genre.
Yeah, truly, that's different, I like it.
Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah. And did you have formal training as a writer, or how did you?
I went to school for, English. I mean, I took some writing classes. I took writing classes, like, middle school, high school, post-college as well. Um, yeah, creative writing wasn't my major, though. It's actually, like, pre and early modern literature, and then I did a language. My language was, Egyptian hieroglyphics, so it was very,
Oh, that's
niche,
cool.
again, very obscure.
Has that helped you at all with your English?
No, but I'm learning Japanese, and I swear it helps, like, learning
Okay,
kanji. Yeah.
okay. The symbolism.
Exactly. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I think it's interesting, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm learning Korean, and the the structure, the sentence structure is completely different. So it's I think it gives us a different mindset when writing. I don't know if you feel that is. I don't know how advanced your Japanese is, but I feel like it can give you a different perspective or different ways of writing because the
Yeah,
structure is so different.
absolutely. I think the structures and also just, like, how things are worded could be
Mhm.
maybe more poetic, and looking at, in Japanese, like, a kanji and seeing, kind of history behind it. That's the same with Egyptian hieroglyphics, like, where certain words come from, like being fired is having your head chopped off. That's very interesting. It comes from
Okay.
their history.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think they have more of an ancient tradition than English, because English is actually a relatively not new language, but I mean, it's not, I don't know, it doesn't have that like, I don't know the history of Asian languages, but I think at some point most of them were loosely derived from Chinese,
Mhm.
which has a very like a 14,000 year written history, where others only have like maybe 4,000 years. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a different tradition of language.
definitely. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's cool you're learning Korean. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I don't, I've been trying for a very long time and I'm just not getting the hang of it. But as you get older, I think it's more difficult to learn a language too. Because I did some French in high school as well. And it feels like even now, my French is better than my Korean, which is sad.
Yeah, it's so hard as you get older,
It's really
definitely.
difficult. Yeah. And why did you decide Japanese of all things? Is it because of your interest in anime or?
No, I just kinda I I've been there twice and, um, I don't know what it was. I wanna go on a hike there actually that's really cool. It's the 88 Temple pilgrimage, so you go around this entire island walking. It's like you could it's similar to the Camino de Santiago maybe, but, I just wanted to be able to, like, talk to people, like, "Where is this way? Where is that way?" And when I
Mm,
started learning it, it was just fun and difficult, so I just continued.
yeah, yeah. And they have more words than us too. I know in Korean, the Korean alphabet is something like over 100,000 words.
Oh,
And the English alphabet is like 7,000 words or something. It's like way smaller, our vocabulary. And I don't know if you feel that with writing sometimes. You can't quite express the vocabulary isn't there.
I know, it's so frustrating, and then you look at, just once again taking Japanese, all the words that they have for different types of snow, and we just have
Yes,
snow, and then we have to you have to fluff it up, and I guess that's a whole different type of challenge, uh,
yeah.
but saying things succinctly sometimes can be difficult. That's my challenge maybe,
Uh,
but yeah.
I always, because I'm an academic, I always tell my students, say it as straightforward as possible. Don't do it in a roundabout way,
Mhm.
But I think for literature, that's the opposite. You do want to infer all sorts of poetic things. It doesn't always have to be straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how old are you now? I'm sorry to ask. I
I just turned 33.
Oh, okay. You're like my age. So because I'm asking because I had an interview a few weeks ago with someone who's like much older, like after 60, I think. And she like only got to publish her first novel after, basically towards the latter part of her life. Um, so for aspiring writers, people that don't necessarily have the training and the support and the opportunities to make writing their sole career. What advice would you give to someone like that? Because you got published at a pretty young age, even though you didn't like study to be a writer. So I think that's really impressive. Um, what advice would you give to an aspiring writer?
Um, I I think you should just always keep writing. It doesn't have to be your main thing. If it's your passion, then, you know, just do it when you can do it. I mean, for me, it was on weekends, it was at night, it was, like, overnight sometimes between work. You just kind of fit it in wherever you can fit it in and, see what happens. I mean, you know, I think, an interesting one, although now she's kind of, a bit of a character, J.K. Rowling, it took how
Yeah.
many? tries for
Mhm,
her. And it took
mhm,
the publisher or the agent, right, didn't even believe in her thing. It was his kids that did. It any form of success can come in all sorts of ways. It can come in talking to somebody and they just happen to work in publishing, and then you give them your manuscript. It could be anything, but I think the most important thing, um, don't measure success by traditional going the traditional route, traditional publishing. I think, writing is so personal, and it's really about, you following through, I think.
mhm.
Sitting down and, taking the time is so difficult because it's such a lonely art form. I think one of the loneliest because, if you're a painter, here it is, you can get feedback as it's going along. With writing, just, finding somebody that'll read it is difficult. Finding somebody that can understand you and your writing is even more difficult. So I guess, don't give up and, uh, just recognize that it's, a lonely activity, but it makes you feel like it's your creation, it's your baby. Nobody can ever take that away from you. Even if you get nothing but negative reviews, all 1 stars, it's yours, and
Yeah.
there's something really beautiful about that.
But I see you've got some really good ratings on your
Yeah,
book on
we'll
Amazon.
we'll see. I don't know. It goes either
Um,
way.
how did you meet your publisher? How did that process work? Did you give the manuscript and it
W
happened, or
well, I'm self-published,
oh,
so
you're published.
yeah,
Okay,
so I
okay,
went that route. I haven't even
okay.
tried with this one to find, a publisher, but actually, I was thinking recently that I will because you can always do that post-publishing,
Mm,
especially for self-published people, but I mean, you know, I think published, authors get a bad rap, but once again, The Martian, I mean, he was
mm,
self-published and now he's wow, and, there's
yeah,
been so many that have done extremely well. I think a lot of people just, you know, get bogged down by it, so yeah.
mm. But I think in today's day and age, that's a much maybe not a better option, but a more viable option for aspiring writers. Because, like you say, even J.K. Rowling, no one wanted to publish her work, and then look at her billion-dollar empire. you know.
Yeah, and the problem I mean, one of the problems with, mainstream publishing these days is, like, you listen to a podcast, right? They have, a couple of followers, and then they suddenly are publishing a book. They get a book deal immediately, and they're publishing something that they don't have enough expertise on, so unfortunately, I listen to a lot of true crime. I'm a big true crime person, and, these some of these writers or these books that they've written get really poor reviews because maybe it's a sensitive subject, maybe they haven't done all the research that they should, everything, right? But, it's an easy grab for publishers.
Mm,
So, it really depends on the genre. I think for romance writers, they have so many ways to go about it. For them, like, self-publishing is 100% a fantastic thing to do. Sci-fi is just difficult, it's very difficult. So,
yeah.
just, get it out there however you can get it out there, definitely.
And I think sometimes from publishers too, if you go that route, there's some sort of a expectation to meet their how can I say, you don't have as much freedom to write what you want. I don't know if I'm correct in saying that, but I'm sure they have some input in what you're writing and how you're writing it.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, they can I mean, what is it? Famously, like, Catch-22, that was actually the 22 like, Catch-22 was done by the publishers, right? Because he had, like, Catch-25 or something, and they were like, "We don't like that." It's
Uh,
interesting how these things can be changed. You have um, nothing on the book cover, that's all theirs. They get to do
mm,
that. Um, they do help with the title, which I would love. Um, but yeah, it's a different process, I think. So,
Yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
and you have to do a
That's
lot of self-promotion these days. I have a friend that's
yes.
traditionally published, and it's equivalent. It's, she's doing so much on her own.
Oh, is it? So they don't really handle the marketing part for you. You still need to do that.
Yeah, they can set you up with, um, like, book talk sort of thing, the virtual tours, which you yourself can do as well. But they have higher connections to certain places and distributors and all that. So it's a real, yeah, which way do you want to
Mhm.
go?
Yeah, I guess it's two different options. I wouldn't, well, I don't think one is better than the other. I've published academic articles, and that's a really painful process because you have two reviewers that give you feedback and then they tear you apart. And then,
I
but in
bet.
academia, I guess it's a bit different because if it's not been peer reviewed, then there's no credibility to what you're saying. But I think with creative writing, there's much more freedom with that.
Oh, absolutely. That is such a difficult form of writing. I have a friend that works in the medical field. It seems so, yeah, everything
No,
is
it sucks. Why am I doing this to myself? It's really difficult. Um, that's I think all the questions I wanted to ask you. Are there any final words you wanted to say to people out there who will be listening to this and reading this?
um for people just listening who want to get into writing, I think just or creative writing, sci-fi writing, just do it. You can do it. Just take a little time each day and give yourself permission to write really badly. And then you're going to be editing 1,000 times over. So just write badly
Mm.
first, I think.
Yeah, I know the saying, writing is rewriting and
That's
rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. I always tell my students, if you haven't edited it 7 times at least, I don't want to see it.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's at least.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Quincy, for joining me and sharing your insights about your book. It was really nice to meet you and talk to you and to hear about your book. And when you release your next one or your short stories, I'd love to chat again if you would
Yes.
be willing.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time and everything.